Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today I have a special thing for you. We're gonna kind of go through my workflow of how to create interior space renderings. Specifically, today we're gonna see bathrooms. I just came from the last week on working on a specific project with a friend that he had a specific interior renovation of like a couple of bathrooms in a very nice house, and I was requested to work on a few renderings to kind of get some ideas going. So here are the three renderings kind of that we worked on. Let me see here. And what I want to show you today is the workflow that I use on this, and actually show you the tools. How do I do the workflow step by step of what I do, and just kind of give you an overview of the process so you kind of have an idea what other people are doing whenever they are, getting renderings for clients. Do I think that this is the process that you have to take every time? No, I think it's still always a work in progress. And the only thing I want to say is that it's just kind of every single project sometimes requires something different. So let's go ahead. So specifically, let's start by saying that with this specific project, we use Archicad mainly because my friend, he already had the project already built in Archicad, but I created a copy of that because I knew I was going to be making a few changes with the layers, of adding more specific 3D model items for me to create more realism. So even it's always good to ask whether or not they already have a 3D model. And once they have a 3D model, a lot of times you don't want to work specifically from that model, because when you're trying to bring photorealism to a project, a lot of times you're going to have to be adding other 3D model items that maybe are not specifically building that model, because that model was for architecture, and there's a lot of little items that you don't normally use. Otherwise, just make sure that there's a layer that you can start putting those items, so you're not really conflicting the drawings once your friends going to construction documents or something, or your clients going through that. So but for this specific project, we use Archicad. I use D5 Render, and as the upscaler, I use Create AI, and then I use Photoshop for the post-production. And that's the workflow I use for this. Is this something I recommend all the time? No. I think for something quicker and something more conceptual, I would recommend Enscape. For instance, for this specific project, it was a little late, but I realized that my friend was actually still not having the design completed yet. So there were a lot of changes that we were running and doing, and later on I realized that instead of using D5, not that D5 or 2Motion is bad, but I'm saying for how the things were changing, maybe Enscape was the better solution, because we could have just rendered it right away, and we didn't need to have these polished renderings. We could have just done black and white renderings and things like that to just get feedback, and then move the process more in the design aspect rather than in the rendering aspect of it. But so here's a little bit on the final results of the renderings, right? So this by all means is not a final product, but it's very close to where we wanted to get. Mainly because I only worked on it for maybe 10 hours, maybe a little bit more, maybe somewhere between 10 to 12 hours. So it was like a sprint. But yeah, these are the final results after post-production. And as you can see, I mean, a lot of the items were already built in place. Like for instance, the tile was already set up by the client, and the tile here was already set up with the client. So there was a little more creativity on a few aspects, like this atom here. We were a little more creative with the items and everything we wanted to create. But then with this one here, we were a little more constrained. But now that you've seen the final product, we're gonna go a little bit to how I start the process here. The step one is the model, and I might be able to navigate you a little bit through the model here if things are working correctly, but kind of let me bring these. And as you can see, so here's the model that we had in Archicad, and it's a very basic model. When you see the model, you realize like, okay, it's pretty basic. And this is something I recommend, and this is what I realized that later, like once I was already doing the renderings, I realized there were a lot of things that were not finalized. Was that whenever you're doing the renderings, you really want to put a lot of attention to the 3D model, because that is the foundation of things. And there's a reason why a lot of people do 3ds Max and Blender for renderings. There's a lot of that is because you can do the little bevels and the chamfers and all that stuff, where these Archicad or the Revit, they don't really great for that, but you can still really get very close without really having to have that in the model. But for instance, you really want to put attention to little details. Like for instance, I had to add these little things here just to kind of add the little things. But for an actual artist project, yeah, you will be adding maybe a little bit more detail on the hardware of these things, and a little rail here, and maybe a little bit more detail on this, and maybe, you know, more, just a little bit more detail on little components of the 3D. Maybe, you know, kind of figured out exactly what the mirror is going to look like, or if it's actually like that, figured out the actual connections here, so you can kind of see the metal. There's maybe some metal clips coming in. So, but that's the model we started with. And then from there, I started hiding layers, and actually, because this is a very small space, I really had to be very creative with the cameras, because it is a small space. So whenever you're rotating or something, I was hitting this wall here that you don't see. So you really need to start. That's why it's good to create another model just for you, because that's where I start actually playing with the layers here and realize, okay, I need to take that wall out while still keeping the space enclosed. So whenever I'm actually having this angle like that, I can still kind of fake it a little bit to where, oh, actually, yeah, in that specific case, I hide this wall here, I had that wall here, I kept this wall, but I had that wall, so that gave me more space to put the camera back without me having to, because once you start playing with the focal point, it's fine, but when you play too much, it might actually start distorting things. So it was starting to do that, and I ended up hiding that wall so I could get a couple more feet away, so I could get a better angle on the camera here. But the first step is really the model, kind of working on more details on the model, just making sure that a lot of the times when you're working in an architectural project, you're not really putting emphasis on little things like that, the hardware and the little things, the clips and the little chamfers, and you're not putting a lot of emphasis of the type of sink you're putting in, the type of cabinet you're putting in. So whenever you're actually going to do a photorealistic renders, and that's why, to me, one of the questions I was asking my client was like, do you want something more conceptual? Because if you're still figuring those things out, I don't know if you really want to put yourself in a position of making photorealistic renderings, right? But anyhow, yeah, that's pretty much how we started. So once I kind of put it in the rendering engine, I actually used Enscape for this specific one because I just wanted to just start playing with the camera and start playing with the lighting and what were the potential camera angles and the lighting weaknesses and strengths of these aspects. So I started kind of playing a little bit with that. I started asking my client, like, what is that you want to show on the thing? What is the story that we want to create on this? And a lot of times, like, the main story was really, or the main thing component of this, like, you have a skylight here, and you can really add really good lighting into the project here. And so I was really thinking, okay, that's really the main thing, the shower. The shower, it's really the main thing that is gonna sell this, along with the nice lighting here. And that's really the story about it. And then we start playing a little bit more with the lighting and kind of how is it coming down and how it's interacting with the rest as far as the rest of the lighting. I was also starting to realize that the model was a little bit, maybe the camera, the aspect ratio of the camera must be wide, and I was like, okay, I started to think maybe I can actually do more vertical, right? Because it was tight, so you don't want to have like an aspect ratio different. But this was, again, I didn't want to put the aspect ratio yet. I was just gonna get the emphasis on the lighting and how does this look like as far as the model, right? I was just gonna ask the client like if he's happy with the model as of right now. Now, of course, there were things that we realized, like as I mentioned before, that were not quite that right that I needed to be working on. And this is a project I came in to do the renderings. I didn't know I was gonna have to do 3D model stuff, but for instance, the shower here, that there, all that is, there's not a lot of detail you see. So if you're really gonna do photorealistic renderings, you really need to bring high quality items to the table, because otherwise it's gonna kill the photorealism, right? Like if you're bringing something like that, like it's just, it doesn't matter how good your rendering engine is, how much ultra quality you can bring into the material, if at the end of the day is just, I mean, this is just mainly for beam purposes, as far as representing a shower in a plan. It's not really made for doing renderings, right? So you really need to start bringing more like high quality items into it. So that's something I realized, shit, we need to start, I need to start bringing more of these things into the thing. So, but you know, first step would be the model, you know, kind of work on the 3D model. And then here's when you start kind of getting these and realizing like, oh yeah, we're missing that and that, then you go back and then model again, right? Then really polish the model again. I'll go and jump all the way here if needed. And here is where it starts getting tricky too, because now you're playing with colors and materials, and you really need to start bringing high quality materials. A lot of the times, I don't know if this was the thing, but for instance, all these materials were Archicad materials. I think this one here actually adjusted enough so it doesn't look too bad. And you can tell that it has a little bit more normal here, which is fine. I was able to adjust this material better, because that's why you see the reflection, so it's better quality material. But for instance, you see these were like Archicad materials, so this was a hard thing because you could kind of tell like there's repetition. I was adjusting that one. This is like, again, little Archicad material, so it was coming too flat a little bit. I was able to change this, and you can tell like how the material changed, you know, like now you have actually reflections, you can tell it's more polished. But now you just have to kind of really start thinking about like, okay, you can tell like that I brought these in, I brought that in, so you can tell like the materials start to kind of look better, but there's a few items that they still needed to work on. So I talked to my client, and you know, there's still a few things that need corrections, but what you want to at least get conversations, like start the conversation, is on the materials, the colors, the feeling. Now that you also have not just the materials, but now you have lighting, and how does the lighting interact with the materials? Like you can see that, right? Like the wall, is it interacting properly? Is it bringing in the right reflections to each material? Is it supposed to be like that, right? Is that stainless steel supposed to be reflecting? And here you can kind of have conversations on here, right? We had a conversation with my friend here saying like, well, do we want it to look like that? It kind of was looking weird too, because this is an extended thing, and I thought it was looking weird. And it was not a camera issue, it's just like you have a very elongated sink. And now is when you start, and honestly, my opinion, this is, you know, these things should have come here. So again, I thought there were like some design elements that they were still needing to be more tighter. But as far as that, you know, there's a few items, like for instance, is the glass reflecting okay? How are you reflecting here? This glass at the back is frosted, is that okay? We want to keep it clear, and if we want to keep it clear, what do you want to see behind the glass, right? So there's a lot of little items that maybe you're not thinking at the beginning, but then once you start kind of rendering on these things, and you want a photorealistic renderings, then is when these things come out, right? Like what is that you want to see behind it? You want to see a tree? Do you want to see, is there like a house behind it? You want to be just frosted? You want to just see it all white? But once you have that, then you can have another conversation with your client, and then is when you will go back again to the 3D model, and from there you will adjust things like the items as far as materials, as far, oh, you guys have to even be to the 3D model. You can just go, if it's just materials, you can just adjust materials. But in this case, you know, there were still little things in the 3D, for instance, the cabinets. I need to adjust these materials in Archicad. So I go back again to the model, and then with that, now you can go back and give them another rendering here. So step 1 is model, step 2 is white rendering, step 3 color render, and then step 4 you give it a more polished thing. So here is when I finally start playing with the aspect ratio of it, because I start realizing like this is a tight room, and for me to tell the whole story I need to have a vertical, because that's the way the image works better. It's just calling it to be a vertical, not a horizontal. The space is tighter. If you want it to look better and you want to have more, showing more, I need to have a vertical. And the vertical really helped me to tell a better story, as you can tell. Like, it just looks less like, I don't know, it does have a, even though it's tighter, everything you can appreciate a lot more of every aspect of the ceiling, of the wood, of the cabinet. Like, you can still get everything without you having to have like that or horizontal aspect ratio. So here's where I changed the aspect ratio. We did some changes to the items here. I added a little bit more items. I kind of play a little bit more with the lighting, with the reflection of the materials, and I think that's the final one, because once you kind of come here, you realize, yeah, that's exactly the same one. So, you know, just kind of polish, making sure the metal looks fine. Here's where we really start playing with the blues and the golds and the lighting here, and that's kind of the final one that we did. But then once you do the corrections here, you generally you do final corrections. And then with the final correction, you might have to go back to the model again one more time, and then go back, render it again, and then work on the post-production on it. And once you do the post-production, that's what I use Korea. So Korea, I use it mainly to upscale it and to get that more sharpness. With that one there, I've been doing videos on Topaz, so you can be using Topaz. If you don't want to use any of those, you can just use Photoshop and go to the camera raw item, and from there you can really change a little bit of the denoising and the sharpness and all those items for you to kind of get that sense. And then Photoshop, yeah, I did use Photoshop for the camera raw. I use Photoshop to kind of corrections and add a little bit of contrast here and there. But that's pretty much the workflow. A little bit on these one here, I kind of did the same. Here I had to be a little bit more playful. The great thing, for instance, about, let's start with this one here first. So here is the same room. The only thing I did, in Archicad, I created like a view where I hide these walls that were covering the room, and I was able to get the camera out, and then I was able to shoot the camera and then have that room. I don't know if I have that, but you know, kind of, it didn't do the cuts. I mean, it did the cut here and here, but it was a wide model, so I had to Photoshop the other black walls. But other than that, it worked great, right? Like, it's, you know, maybe I could have extended the cut a little farther away so I could actually get the skylight here. Again, just at that point, I also wanted to get the door handle. I didn't want to cut it too much because then you kind of start cutting the window here. So it was a little tricky section cut. It was a little tricky because once you kind of hide those elements, the mirror starts reflecting what's going on farther away. So honestly, there was a door that should have been gotten here, and I just didn't have time to work on it because my friend told me that he wanted to kind of just work on this for himself. So at that point, I just didn't have time to adjust it anymore. But generally speaking, I would have just create another rendering with that wall in there and then just Photoshop it in here. But other than that, yeah, these ones I kind of created these in D5. And then a great thing that I found was that once you kind of have a rendering in D5, it will really help me a lot to let's see. It will really help me a lot if I could come here and, for instance, here, and then do the AI style transfer and then do a realistic. It really helps a lot. Like, it adds these elements of photorealism. Like, it gives it a pass where it will create like the towels and everything will look a little bit more realistic. The metals will look a little bit more realistic. Everything will look a little bit more realistic when you enhance it. So that's why I really like the D5 renderer more than, for instance, these ones here. You see how enhanced this? Like, they actually look photorealistic. Even though they are not as sharp, that's the bad thing, you lose sharpness. But you see how it creates these materials? Like, it actually enhances them to where they actually get that fuzziness, right? Whereas if you get them directly from the renderer, they look fine, but they still look a little bit animated. But when you give that pass of the in-painting, it does that extra texture to give it just that extra level of realism. Also, another cool thing that I found was that, for instance, for this specific item here, I was able to come to the 3D objects here, and you can go to model, I believe it is. Where did he go? Okay, now that I'm here, it actually, I cannot see it now anymore. Maybe I'm covering it here. Well, there is a section where you can, oh, here it is. You can actually create a 3D item. So for instance, if I come here and say, I don't want to use it because I already have used my 5 points, but if I put surfboard, it will actually create the surfboard, but it comes very pixelated. Then you can refine it, but you can tell that it's not perfect, right? It's more like an item. Like if you want to have a very close item, it's not great, but if you want to have an item that is in the background and you don't know where to get it, you can always create that 3D model and you can refine it, and it will enhance it a little bit better. And once you do the in-painting, it will even clean it a little bit more. It's still not perfect, you can tell, right? Like you can tell like there is some mistakes here and there, but other than that, like you know, the materials are sharper. Then you see how these guys sharper. This looks actually real. Actually realizing there's little artifacts there. That's the bad thing when you do the in-paint. You have to be very careful on that. But in general, that's pretty much it. You do the post-production in Photoshop. There's not a lot to do in Photoshop, to be honest, because I did a lot of the model already. So in Photoshop is mostly just adding filters, maybe hiding here and there little things that you didn't want to, you know, show. I think that one guys looked pretty cool. But that's pretty much the process. I will say, it really, if I had to give you some tips or recommendations, I would say really put a lot of emphasis to the model, because the model is what's gonna dictate how it's gonna look later and how much realism people are gonna bite it. Like, I really, how good it's gonna sell it. Because if you think that you can just model only, and believe me, don't get me wrong, like I like to model stuff for architecture, but I'm not like 100% an artist in the sense, like I'm not in love with modeling little details like the little hardwares and stuff like that. But I have learned to understand how important these little items are, and to a point where like I actually try to like not having to model those by trying to get those from libraries. And it could be the way, if you find a great library, just try to use those. But the important thing is to really get the model right. The second important thing is to get the lighting right. I would say third and fourth is really, if not the second two, I would say the second is to get the lighting right and the aspect ratio right. I know that here I did the aspect ratio at step 4, but really you want to get the aspect ratio done along with the white model in the lighting. Sometimes you're not gonna get it, in the sense like, because the design and things are changing later on, you realize like, oh, maybe it was better to do these other things. So I get it that you're not always gonna get it 100% right, but trying to get the lighting and the aspect ratio on that second step, that's very important. Step number 3 is kind of get the materials right, as far as high quality materials, kind of making sure the materials are actually reflecting the way they should be reflecting, along with the lighting and with the reflections and things like that. And then number 4, I will say just kind of how everything is interacting as a whole. What do the client think could be incorporated? Not as far as he giving you orders, but as far as making sure your client's happy. I think a lot of people just do things that they want to do without having the input for the client or for the person we're servicing. And I think it's always good to keep that person in conversation, just to make sure that at the end of the day, it's their project. You are there to really help them with the images and presentation of things, but at the end of the day, the best thing you can have is your word of mouth, so they can bring you more clients. So you really want to make sure like they are happy with what they get. And a lot of that is just having these conversations to make sure that, you know, if for instance, if I gave them this and he never said like, well, I kind of honestly don't like the gold, the brass here, I actually wanted silver. Well, that's something that maybe I missed, right? Like maybe I just never gave the client that communication of like, hey, should we do this thing or that, or I kind of finalize it, and he realized like, hey, I want everything a different color now, right? So it's good to kind of have a lot of conversation with the client within these 3 steps here, because by the time you get here, you want to make sure that everything is nailed with the material and the lighting and the views. So by the time you get here, there's no surprises as far as the client telling you that he doesn't like something, as far as the whole like big major items, as far as like a 3D item or a whole material. Yeah, that's pretty much my workflow of what I did for this specific project, and I hope you guys like it, and I'll see you in the next one.